Fantastic. And Lindsay, do we have a quorum?
If Doug has made somebody else or admitted somebody else, we are one short as far as I know, unless he's added somebody that I haven't seen yet.
Did you get Eric?
Yes,
Okay.
I think we still need one more.
Trying to bring Chuck Abraham in now.
Okay, that'll be quorum.
There you go.
Fantastic. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Transportation Committee meeting for this morning. Lindsay, could you do the roll call, please?
Okay, I will. So get ready to unmute yourself when I call your name. Chuck Abraham.
Here.
Wait, Darwin Burkhart. Kevin Carrier.
Here.
Lynette Ciavarella.
Here.
Michael Connolly. John Donovan. Doug Ferguson.
Here.
Tony Greep. Lisa Lawson-Stark. Robert Hahn. Jessica Hector Sue.
Here.
John Paul Deepla.
Here.
Tom Kelso. And then I think Troy Simpson is going to be for Kendall County. I don't know if Troy has been admitted or if he's on the attendees.
Troy must be on his cell phone or web browser. He cannot be promoted to panelist, so he's on and listening.
Okay. Christina Kopkowski.
Here.
Eric Llewellyn.
Here.
Chris Hebert. Tara Orban.
Here.
Jessica Ortega.
Here.
Heidi Prasad. Brian Carlson.
Here. Good morning.
Thank you. Jackie Forbes for Kane County.
Here.
Mayor Rockingham. Joe Schofer.
Here.
Dave Seglin.
Here.
Chris Snyder is, I believe, not here. P.S. Siraj.
I'm here.
Great. Scott Weber. And Audrey Wennick.
Here.
And Amy Lee for the tollway.
Here.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. Moving on to agenda item 2, agenda changes and announcements. As permitted by the governor's disaster declaration of January 8th, 2021, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that the meeting is transparent as possible, we posted the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. Are there any agenda changes?
There are not.
Okay, let's move on to announcements then. Do we have any announcements?
Nope.
No. All right. Just a reminder that if any attendees would like to address the committee during the public comment section of the meeting, please use the GoToWebinar chat function to indicate your desire to do so. CMAP staff will be monitoring the chat and will let me know, and we will cue you when it's your turn. So moving on to approval of minutes from April 16th. I would like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
Yeah.
I think we have a motion by Kevin Carrier, and do I have a second?
Second.
Lynette, second. Thank you. Do we have any changes or discussion?
There was one change that needed to be made. Darwin Burkhart was actually present and was not counted as being present, so that will be added to that list.
Okay, great. I had one other change, which is on page 5, there's a reference to an RTA last rider survey, and it's actually a lapsed rider survey. So if we could make that change as well, that would be great. All right, any other changes? No? Okay, Lindsay, go ahead and do the roll call.
Okay, Chuck Abraham.
Aye.
Darwin, not here. And Kevin Carrier,
Aye.
Lynette Ciavarella,
Aye.
and we haven't seen if Michael Connolly's in. John Donovan, Doug Ferguson.
Aye.
Oh, and Lisa is not here. Robert Hahn, not here. Jessica,
Aye.
John Paul Deepla,
Aye.
and Troy can put in a chat if how he would like to vote. Christina Kopkowski,
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn,
Aye.
and Tara Orban,
Aye.
Jessica Ortega,
Aye.
and Heidi, Brian Carlson,
Aye.
Jackie Forbes, come back, and Joe Schofer,
Aye.
and Dave Seglin,
Aye.
and P.S. Siraj,
I was not at that meeting, but I'll say aye.
and Audrey Wennick,
Aye.
and Amy Lee.
Aye.
Thank you.
Hey, Lindsay, did you call Holly Beneman?
No, I did not.
She's sitting in for Tom Kelso.
Great, thank you. Holly?
Holly, do we have your vote?
Yes. Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Great. The motion carries. Let's move on to item number 4, committee reports. For this, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Happy Friday. Good to see you all. A couple notes for me. First, I wanted to introduce our new Deputy Executive Director for Research Analysis and Programming, Yusuf Salama. He's on screen now. Yusuf has more than a decade of experience in transportation and infrastructure and has helped numerous public and private partnerships through his role previously at PPP Canada, Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and most recently he was at Turner and Townsend. So we are excited with the knowledge and expertise that Yusuf brings to our team here, but just wanted to turn it over to him for just a moment to say hello and introduce himself again.
Erin, thank you so very much for the introduction. I hope everyone can hear me. It's a pleasure to have joined the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and I'm very much excited to work and to meet all of you and build and create solid and steady relationships with all of you. It's certainly been a journey since I've arrived in the United States in 2017. As Erin has mentioned, I've worked in Los Angeles, New York, and now here in Chicago. But most of my experience, just to be brief, has been on the project planning, implementation, and execution. And for projects across transportation, water, wastewater, local roads, and highways projects. So I do bring a bit of an experience predominantly using public-private partnerships from planning all the way to contract execution and administration. So I'm hoping that experience will be of good use here on these committees and the work that CMAP does. And I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you very much for the introduction, Erin.
Great. Well, we will certainly find ways to get more detailed meetings on the books with many of you as we bring Yusuf up to speed on the work that we do and the work that you do and what we do in partnership here. So thanks for welcoming him to the team and the committee today. So just wanted to touch on 2 other things here. First, the CMAP Regional Excellence Awards. One of the things we're focused on this summer is developing our own awards program to recognize partners and stakeholders from across the region who are successfully implementing the goals and recommendations of the 2050 plan. So you should have seen a note in our weekly update, but if you have projects that you're working on, your agency is, or also that your partners are working on that you think would be representative or well recognized in terms of how they help us achieve our regional goals, please do let us know and we'd be happy to reach out to them and encourage them to apply to our first Regional Excellence Awards program that we have here. The other thing that I wanted to touch on this morning is just, I've received a number of letters from Council of Mayors in the region regarding the American Rescue Plan funding that's being allocated from the state to the region. The portion of which that's coming to the region is $42 million of suballocated funding here. So first, I want to emphasize that this doesn't mean that your council is going to receive fewer of these dollars. What I have been talking to folks about is how we prioritize and what we fund with these dollars. And so while it isn't STP funds that are coming to the region, I understand and I recognize the important work that transportation stakeholders, Council of Mayors, and the City of Chicago have worked hard and dedicated to the recommitment of the STP formula funds that the formula that we put together here at the region over the past handful of years. And so, it's important to note that our region is really unique in terms of how we allocate our resources here in the region. We may be the only MPO across the country that suballocates STP dollars to our councils of governments here. And I raise that point only because it really does tie us closer together in terms of the way that we work in addressing our critical problems and opportunities here with transportation infrastructure. Early into the pandemic, we began convening stakeholders across our region to talk about what an equitable economic recovery looks like. I think many of you realize and recognize that our transportation system is really critical to this. First, because we need to move people safely across the region to their jobs, to get home to their families, to all of the important destinations that we go to on a daily basis, but also because we are a hub of freight activity for the nation. And additionally, our economy is just intrinsically tied to goods movement here in Chicago. And so also, this past year at the request of this committee, we've committed to lean in and address some of the safety challenges that we're seeing across the region, rising fatalities and serious injuries. And this region really is not meeting our federal performance measures on safety. So we really can't silo or segment this issue in order to resolve it and to have the impact we all want. I believe we really need to consciously and purposefully set safety as a priority, and it should lead to all of our decision making here. And I know that there are projects in each of your programs that help us achieve our regional goals of congestion reduction, safety, increased ADA accessibility, multimodal needs, support for access to transit jobs. So this morning, I just wanted to talk to the committee a little bit. I'm not asking the committee members if we could develop a new formula for distributing the funds. That's not on the table. I'm proposing that shouldn't our goals drive how we fund and apply these funds across the region? We know that technology is important to a safer, more efficient transportation network. We know that bicycle and pedestrian improvements can create safer experiences at critical junctures in our system, and that the crashes between humans and vehicles are particularly deadly. We know that freights and goods movement keeps our region and our economy strong, but there are many places across our network where we can reduce conflicts between freight, whether it's trains and trucks, and passenger vehicles. And all of our councils, and those of you who are involved in your councils, have projects like these in your existing programs, projects that address critical safety needs, whether it's through technology, through engineering, through construction. And so as a regional planning agency, it's our responsibility to raise these system-wide opportunities to fund our priorities here. So at the end of the day, recognizing that $42 million isn't enough to solve all of our pressing needs, but thinking about how we allocate these resources, not by changing the formula, but really using a lens that would provide some meaningful wins for us in the region here. Because I think we can all agree that we want to go back to our federal partners, to USDOT, to our congressional delegation with a story of how we were able to put these recovery funds to work in a meaningful way to help them achieve the goals that they've placed on this region here. So we're targeting October to have CMAP's guidance on the application of these dollars out to our regions. But first, I wanted to take the opportunity to hear from our partners here. We'll be talking to the MPO, to the CMAP board, and to the Council of Mayors Executive Committee about the allocation of these funds. So again, a new formula isn't what we're talking about here. I think that that's the best way for us to allocate these funds. It's what then gets prioritized in the programs that you already have as we look to allocate these resources across our region here. So if I could just take a moment and hear from the Transportation Committee members about principles, goals, or priorities that we might want to consider as we develop our guidance that will be forthcoming.
Any of the committee members have thoughts for Aaron this morning?
Yeah, I wanted to just ask a question, really. I mean, every council, the city of Chicago, all of our programs within CMAP, we all have criteria for project selection. And I think most of those, as far as I know, they all prioritize safety, and of course, connectivity, mobility, hopefully equity, other goals like that. So, I mean, are you suggesting maybe we should take another look at our criteria for project selection, or perhaps have a different way of programming these funds as compared to the other funds that we already do receive?
So, my suggestion here this morning is that we know where some of these projects are that would make a big difference, and can we use these funds to apply these funds to those projects that already exist before we pick some of the projects that we know probably need to happen too, right? Like resurfacing, right? Some of the projects that are critical, but maybe not address a critical safety need or a critical freight connection. So that's my question, is that I know that all of our programs have been selected based on, the measures that you have in your own individual programs, but there's a diverse array of projects in there. And so how do we make sure that the dollars that we spend, we're really thinking about applying them to the highest and best needs within that individual already performance-based program that you have? I think we can drive a little bit more value out of that. So not new projects that need to be in there, but thinking about, what it is we want to tell the story about what we accomplished with these dollars.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the committee for Aaron?
This is Holly. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Great. Just, something that I want to point out to the group is the deadline on these funds. And so as you're thinking about it and as you're preparing, keep in mind that these funds need to be obligated by, I believe it's September 30th, 2024. And so to keep that in mind as you're considering options.
Thanks, Holly, for adding that. Any other thoughts or questions for Aaron?
Jessica, this is Christina.
Sure.
I just want to point out that by utilizing these funds for projects that are early, that would be able to advance fund or move up projects in our current programs, it would allow for us to fund those other projects that may be later years in the TIP that would not meet these deadlines, where we'd still be getting the same benefit just because we've been able to move these projects up. So I think we need to be broader minded in not necessarily worrying about exactly where we program these specific dollars, but if these dollars can be programmed to advance fund a project that may be ready to go, but isn't funded until 24 or 25, and then it clears up additional funds for a freight project or an ITS project or something that is later in the program that could be moved up, that's just as big of a benefit to the region as, say, putting that money directly into an existing freight project that may not necessarily meet deadlines because of right-of-way restrictions or things like that.
Programming is certainly an art and not a science, for sure.
I'm sorry if you covered this earlier, but I just want to clarify those $42 million in the federal recovery funds coming to our region. And these are going to be programmed, dispersed through the STP formula. Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
So will some of it be going to the shared fund and then some of it to the councils and some to the city?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure I understood the program.
Yeah, can I make a suggestion? This is Joe Schofer. The one thing I haven't heard, and perhaps it's because I haven't been listening carefully enough, is paying some attention to resilience to natural hazards, resilience to climate change, resilience to disruptions, accidental and intentional. This may not be a primary criterion, but I think it's something we need to be paying attention to, particularly because these kinds of disruptions have significant social and economic effects, and particularly differential effects across the income and social spectrum.
Thanks for that.
If I could jump in too, this is Kevin with Lake County, and kind of piggybacking on a couple of the comments earlier too, and I'll jump on Christina's first. I think project readiness and kind of active program management, needs to play a role too, and thinking about it, like you said, from the programming sense that, getting some resurfacing jobs or things like that that may address some safety and pavement conditions, state of good repair done now too, may free up some funds, in the future for other larger critical type projects too that aid in the recovery. And then I think Dave kind of mentioned it too, just, we kind of, I guess I'll speak for our council. I know we went through a pretty long process to kind of come up with a methodology. And I think, if it's not number one on the list, I think safety is pretty darn high up there too. So I guess maybe kind of a question or just a statement too. I don't, if we have, say, like a resurfacing job, pavement preservation job that scores kind of up at the higher end because it maybe address some safety and stuff like that too, are we kind of saying that we wouldn't want to put these funds to a project like that, or are we just saying that we want to consider safety kind of higher up on the scoring list and make sure that we're, projects that are addressing safety and maybe ADA and non-motorized and equity and stuff like that are kind of all taken into consideration, right? Are we excluding certain types of projects, I guess, or would it be?
No, I think my ask to you today is just to really hear back from you about where there might be some opportunities for us to address some of these critical problems. One of the things that I just, emphasized in my talking points was that we aren't meeting our safety performance measures across the region because fatalities and serious injuries continue to increase here. So, that's an opportunity area for us, I think, and recognizing that I know all transportation projects, right, safety comes first. But if again, it's sort of taking the opportunity to think through a little bit how we begin to solve those problems. And if there's a way to commingle or, co-solve these problems with aid funds, I think that's really what I wanted to talk to you all about today.
Yeah, and certainly, and we certainly see the same trends and stuff like on our data that we have in our system too, with the fatalities increasing and serious injuries and just volume in general. So certainly appreciate that too.
Hi, this is Audrey Wenning from MPC. It seems like it would be important to prioritize regional gaps, where we have networks and we know there's a gap in particular with biking and walking networks that is preventing people from taking trips. And I think we need to recognize the importance of providing safe alternatives to driving. If safety is our number one problem, that we need to continue to invest in our bicycle and pedestrian networks, and in particularly places of regional significance where there are choke points.
Thanks, Audrey.
This is Jackie from Kane County. I just want to piggyback on our county partners and saying we do have our contingency list of programs that are ready to go that generally do prioritize safety as one of the top scoring pieces in our methodology. So we're pretty confident that if we're starting to look at trying to spend this money by a certain date, that we have projects already in there ready to go that will meet any sort of criteria that we wanted to focus on region-wide. They have bike ped infrastructure, they look at safety, multimodal things. So we support using our SDP methodologies to be the starting point for where we select the projects that will receive the funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie.
And Aaron, if I could just ask another question. I'm sure maybe you're not ready for this today, but I'm sure CMAP staff has some ideas of their own regarding this. Do you have some ideas that you're going to throw out at some point as well, or?
In terms of where we're headed here, I mean, I think for us, I think we want to make sure that we're just taking a close look at the projects that we're applying the funding to, and that they're addressing some of these bigger regional problems. If there are projects already programmed and ready to go and be obligated by 2024. Again, I recognize that there are a lot of if, ands, or buts, but in mobilizing these dollars, getting them spent on time is top priority. But again, you know, just thinking about the programs that you have, the diverse array of projects in there, I want to make sure that we are, if there's an opportunity for us to advance some of the challenges that we have that are multi-jurisdictional, that would, you know, help sort of stitch together opportunities between our partners here and sort of think about it a little bit more holistically, that really is, I don't think there's anything other than that, beyond that we have in our mind. All right, well, I appreciate everyone's time and thoughts this morning. You know how to find me if you need me. But thanks for, you know, engaging in this conversation and your feedback on some of the existing elements in your program and where there's some opportunities here for us to collaborate.
Thanks, Erin. If anybody would like to engage a little bit more on this, what are some forums for them to do that going forward?
So we'll be, I'll be giving the same sort of preview here next week at the MPO and engaging them in a brief discussion. Also at the board meeting next week, and then the Council of Mayors Executive Committee. Ultimately, the STP formula is an agreement between the City of Chicago and the Council of Mayors of the region. And so, you know, we'll be talking with both of them closely here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is the federal fiscal year 2019 to 2024 TIP amendments and administrative modifications. First, for that, we have Russell.
Okay, good morning. Included in your packet today is a memo detailing the 119 TIP changes contained in formal TIP amendment 21-05 and the 180 TIP changes contained in administrative amendments 21-05.1 and 21-05.2. As seen in the memo, formal amendments resulted in an increase of $364 million in total project cost for all prior, current, and future years. Administrative amendments added another $67.3 million to the TIP. The net change for the total cost in the TIP from all amendments resulted in $431 million being added to the TIP in prior, current, and future years. As shown in the memo, while new projects comprised most of the formal changes, administrative amendments were more equally dispersed between project phases being converted to or from advanced construction, cost changes, and schedule changes. The amendments, along with the memo, were posted on May 25th for committee and public review. At this time, staff requests the approval of the formal TIP amendment 21-05 as presented. I'll take any questions if there are any at this time.
All right, thanks, Russell. Can I have a motion to approve this? We'll talk about it in a second. Can I have a motion to approve the TIP amendment 21-5?
Jessica, before we approve it, could I ask a couple questions?
Sure, absolutely. I was going to take the motion first, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So this is Audrey from the Metropolitan Planning Council, and I guess regarding both, so there's an administrative and a conformity amendment. We noticed that there are 4 new projects in the conformity analysis, of which 3 are roadway expansion projects. And I wanted to raise the issue with the committee of the extent to which we are evaluating alignment of the projects funded in the TIP with the long-range transportation plan on to 2050. And, you know, I think we all know that that's the intention. But given that we have safety in crisis, and we have indicators such as reduction of single occupancy vehicle trips, I think it's incumbent upon us to understand how we're prioritizing projects in the TRIP so that we're truly achieving the goals of the long range plan. And so I would like to ask about, for more information about that process and potentially for us to, in future meetings, get into that conversation a little bit more deeply so that we have a better sense of the alignment and the methods for prioritizing how we're spending these large amounts of dollars. So that's one thing. I'll mention it. I'd like to mention a specific project as well, which is not a new project, but is proposed for funding. And I just want to highlight kind of a conflict that we see. It's a project on Wood Street through Dixmoor and Harvey. And it's a roadway expansion. But at the same time, there's a South Suburban Mayors and Managers Complete Streets and Trails Plan that recommends this project, this very location for a road diet right sizing. And so I think this is sort of a question of how we're getting to this place where we have a project that's in direct conflict with a community plan. And I think we're all seeing that we need to do a better job of implementing complete streets in this region because of the safety problems that we have. So I'm just, raising this question about whether we want to continue to advance a project like this, which looks like it's in direct conflict with what the community wants.
Okay, thanks, Audrey. Russell, do you want to address Audrey's comments first from a staff perspective and talk maybe briefly about your recommendation, both for the 3 out of the 4 projects that Audrey's talking about, and if you want this specific project as well that's in conflict with the local plan?
Okay, so let's take things a couple things at a time. I'm going to defer the projects that she first mentioned that are on the conformity amendment to one. That's the next item on the agenda, so we can discuss those at that time, since it's not really actually part of this motion. In terms of projects such as Wood Street or just in general how these projects get into the TIP, I think it's important to remember that what's in the TIP is a compilation of a variety of things that we as a region have to prioritize. There's implementing the long range plan. There's supporting the performance measures that we just discussed, that Aaron just discussed and we've talked about with safety in some of these other things. And then there's being physically constrained. And so there's a variety of competing things. There's federal regulations, there's NEPA, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into how we get to where we're at. In terms of projects such as Wood Street, IDOT's on the call. They're welcome to talk about their project. It is their project. They are the sponsor. But projects such as this do advance safety. We have in the TIP when there are check boxes for which performance measures the project is going to address. In this specific project, the safety checkbox and pavement condition are both boxes that this project not only does it address, but it's also a long-term project. It's been in the TIP for, I don't know, let's see, it's got 09 TIP ID, so it's going north of a decade, and funding has become available now, and it's finally advancing. So this is a long-term sought improvement by IDOT in this region to address an issue. So on the project itself, I would defer to IDOT on specifics, but I do know, sitting in on many of these meetings, that complete streets, that talking to the community is all not only required, but it's something that IDOT actively does on all their projects. So I think that any community needs would have been addressed for this project through the coordination process and the public involvement process. So hopefully that addresses some of these.
Yeah, and this is Brian Carlson with IDOT District 1. Yeah, you're right. This project has been in the TIP for a very long time. In fact, it's actually the last project we have left to deliver that was funded as part of the Illinois Jobs Now capital program. We've had difficulties advancing this project forward because of the local cost involved in the project. Specifically, Harvey owns a water main that's within the IDOT right-of-way. and that water main needs to be relocated at Harvey's expense. So we worked with Harvey and Dixmoor through the South Suburban Mayors and Managers to secure funding to relocate that water main. And then being that they are a cohort 4 community, they aren't required to pay the match for that relocated water main. There's other local project costs involved that would normally be Harvey's responsibility. But as I announced at last TC meeting, IDOT District 1 for state projects now has adopted the CMAP cohort community methodology, and we're using transportation development credits to cover the local share of the project cost. So Russ is correct that yes, bike ped accommodations are included, and regardless of the new legislation, we would have covered those costs under the cohort 4 community. We're installing roadway lighting at the request of Harvey. We are jurisdictionally transferring the newly reconstructed roadway to Harvey upon completion of the project, and as part of those jurisdictional discussions, we've agreed to pay for the roadway lighting, which would normally not be covered by IDOT as it's a local community request. So, and also to address your comment about the conflict and what the community envisioned for the project, when we began the phase 1 for this project 10 years ago, our proposal was to do a 3-lane cross-section. Through our coordination with Harvey and the public comments we received during the community outreach and everything, the project scope was changed to basically a 4-lane cross-section at the request of Harvey. And then we added the bike paths and everything. And this is all driven to not only address safety and operations, but also, give this community some development opportunities and revitalization opportunities in this area. We were kind of surprised to discover that really for the folks that work at the hospital and everything in the area, there's no place for them to go to for lunch in Harvey. They have to leave town for lunch. So we're hoping that this type of improvement will spark some economic revitalization in the area, as well as addressing the safety. There's a couple of railroad grade crossings that we've been working with ICC on to improve the safety of those crossings, and those improvements are also included in this project. So this project goes a long way towards addressing safety for both motorized and non-motorized users. And it's basically not going to be any cost to Harvey through our cohort community adoption, and also through the SDP for the water main relocation.
Thanks, Brian. And Russell as well. Audrey, do you have further thoughts on that, or do other members of the committee have questions that they'd like to raise as well? All right. Well, hearing none, we'll go ahead and ask for the motion again on the TIP Amendment 2105.
This is Holly Deanman. I make motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Holly. Can I have a second as well?
Tara Orban will second.
All right, I'll take Tara as the second. Lindsay, can you go ahead and do the roll call?
Okay, let's start with Chuck Abraham.
Aye.
Kevin Carrier. Lynette Ciavarella.
Aye.
Michael Connolly, if we can unmute, I think he's on. Doug Ferguson.
Aye.
Jessica Hector Soup.
Aye.
John Paul Dipla.
Aye.
Holly Benneman.
Aye.
And if Troy Simpson, I'm not sure if he can unmute, we can chat. And Christina Kopkowski.
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn.
Aye.
Tara Orban.
Aye.
Jessica Ortega.
Aye.
Brian Carlson.
Aye.
Jackie Forbes.
Aye.
Let's see, Joe Schofer,
Aye.
Dave Seglin,
Aye.
P.S. Siraj,
I agree with the motion.
Audrey Wenink,
Aye.
Amy Lee.
Aye.
And if there's anybody I didn't call, you could let me know, and otherwise, thank you.
This is Mike Connolly. If I'm unmuted now, aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
I'd add one comment to the conversation. All of these fund sources, whether it's STP local or STP regional, the shared fund, whether it's TAP, CMAP, we all have project selection criteria that are being used to select these projects. And hopefully those criteria align with the goals of the regional plan, but it's never a bad idea just to take another look at your criteria. Times change, needs change, priorities change. So maybe, just from an internal perspective, we should all be taking a look at the way we select projects and see if we need to make any changes for safety, for equity, and for other issues such as that.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, definitely a time for that. All right, this motion carries, and we can go ahead and move on to 5.2, the semi-annual onto 2050 and TIP conformity analysis and TIP amendment. We'll get to your other question on this one, Audrey, but first off to you, Russell.
Okay. Also included in your packet today is the ONTO 2050 TIP conformity analysis and TIP amendment 21-06. The CMAP region, as you know, is a non-attainment area for ozone. Thus, we are required to demonstrate that projects in the TIP conform to the motor vehicle emissions budget for our area through a regional emissions analysis of transportation projects in the TIP. Specifically, projects in the TIP subject to air quality analysis requirements demonstrate, when modeled, that the region does not exceed our motor vehicle emissions budget, which is shown on the last page of the memo in your packet. The memo and the list of projects that are new or had changes were released for a 30-day public comment period that ended on May 17th. No comments were received. On a side note, I want to mention that McHenry County, which was not included in the non-attainment area for the 2015 ozone standards, is now, through a court case, been reclassified and is now rejoined the region as part of the non-attainment area for the 2015 ozone NACs. So both 2008 and the 2015 ozone NACs, we have the same geographic non-attainment area. At this time, staff requests the committee recommend approval of the semi-annual ONTO 2050 TIP conformity analysis and TIP amendment 21-06 to the CMAP board and the MPO policy committee as presented. I will answer any questions at this time, and I'll start just by answering Audrey's first questions. One of the things that you're going to notice in the conformity amendment is you will see your projects that are add lanes or expansion projects primarily. That is because those are the projects that are subject to air quality analysis. Most projects in the TIP are not subject to air quality analysis, such as resurfacings and things of that nature. So the work type of the project determines whether or not it has to undergo the air quality analysis. So anything with a not exempt work type, such as add lanes or new road or things of that nature, those are the ones that get modeled. And this is not by CMAP per se, this is the federal requirements. And in addition to being modeled, those are the only ones that are subject to the conformity analysis. And that's why those are the only ones that will show up on the memo. In terms of the specific projects that are on there, I believe there are 8 projects on the current memo. A couple of them are newly projects that were added in Kane County. They're trying to address some safety and congestion issues. Those projects are going through the NEPA process. And in order to complete the NEPA process, they need to be in the TIP. And in order to be in the TIP, they need to go through the conformity process. So all of these pieces are related to a project advancing. So Kane County, I know, is on the call here. They could answer some questions about those. Most of the other projects are long-term existing projects that had changes that affect the modeling, but not necessarily the project scope or cost or things of that nature. So I don't know if that answers your questions, Audrey, but let me know if it does or if it doesn't.
Yeah, I think thank you for that. I think my question is a a broad and longer term question in terms of the way projects are prioritized to get into the TIP, and making sure that we are spending our regional resources on projects that will deliver outcomes in the long range transportation plan. So I think it would be helpful for this committee to understand what process CMAP uses to determine how projects get into the TIP, and for us to take a look at that potentially through the Onto 2050 update process as well. Something that we could kind of review and think about how making, because we are not getting the results we want. I mean, this is the point. If we're not getting the safety results we want, we need to question what we're doing. And so I think that is sort of my broader question. It's not necessarily going to affect the decision today as much as it sort of flags this issue in terms of, again, if we're trying to reduce single occupancy trips, we're trying to improve safety, and we're, you know, building capacity projects that will increase VMT. Are these objectives in conflict?
Yeah, thanks for that input, Audrey. That's something that we can talk to CMAP staff about as they go through the Onto 2050 update. Sounds like it would be helpful to have a refresher on how projects kind of make their way into the TIP, the processes they go through before they're even put into the TIP, and particularly for some of these long range projects, or not long range, but longer term projects that take a while to get from planning to construction, kind of how the projects make their way through the process. So we'll talk with CMAP staff about adding that to the agenda and somewhere else throughout the year.
Thank you.
Other thoughts? Sure. Other thoughts from the committee or questions for Russell? All right, I'm hearing none, so I'll go ahead and entertain a motion for this TIP amendment 2106 and the TIP conformity analysis to recommend them to the CMAP board. And thanks, Dave. Motion from Dave. Can I have a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Is that Chuck? Yes, thanks, Chuck. That was the
It's
second.
me. Yep.
Great, thank you. Lindsay, can you go ahead and do the roll call?
Okay, Chuck Abraham,
Aye.
Kevin Carrier,
Yes, sorry.
Lynette Ciavarella,
Aye.
Michael Connolly.
Aye.
Thank you. Doug Ferguson,
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue,
Aye.
John Paul Deepla,
Aye.
Holly Benjamin,
Aye.
Christina Kopkowski,
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn,
Aye.
Tara Orban,
Aye.
Jessica Ortega,
Aye.
and Brian Carlson,
Aye.
Jackie Forbes,
Aye.
Mayor Rockingham, Joe Schofer,
Aye.
Dave Seglin,
Aye.
P.S. Siraj,
Aye.
Audrey Wennick,
Aye.
and Amy Lee.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. The motion carries as well. And speaking of Onto 2050 update, that is actually our next agenda item. So for this one, we have both Laura Wilkeson and Lindsay Hollander with us. Laura or Lindsay, would you like to share this item with us?
Sure. Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, as we said, speaking of the Onto 2050 update, we want to come to this committee and share with you about where we're going. So I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay to get into some of the details. So as you all know, that we can go to the next slide, Onto 2050 is the guiding light for all of the work that we do here at CMAP. It was adopted by the board 3 years ago, and it is guided by 3 principles, which all of you know intimately, so I'm going to kick through them really fast. The first is inclusive growth, and as we know, for a stronger and more equitable future, our region needs to ensure that every resident and community has the ability to fully contribute and benefit from the economy. The second is resilience, which will allow us to prepare for rapid changes, both known and unknown. And the third principle is prioritized investment, as we were discussing today, to target scarce public dollars to maximize benefits. So this guides all of the work that we do here at CMAP. So on to the plan update. Again, as I mentioned, ON2 2050 was adopted in 2018. And as a reminder for many of you, CMAP is federally required to update certain elements of the region's long-range plan every 4 years, meaning that that will be adopted by the board as well as the MPO Policy Committee by October of 2022. So the goal of the work that we've embarked on is to meet our federal requirements, adjust the data and performance measurements to reflect current situations, and to respond to the regionally significant project requests. So wanted to take a few minutes to talk about how we're approaching this work so we can meet this deadline. So go on to the next slide. What we're showing here is that actually the 2050 update is 9 interweaving projects, and some of them happen in the linear order as we've kind of shown, but many of them, again, are interweaving. Information will be flowing back and forth or need to be prepared in order for the next part of the evaluation to occur. We want to make sure that we talk to you about each of the different component projects, but we're not going to do it all at once. So like today, we're going to focus in on the financial plan, and Lindsay will be talking about that. But we'll be coming back to you and sharing more information as they become available. I'm also going to share today with you who all the project managers are. So if you have questions in the meantime when we're not focusing on them, or there's concerns you want to share ahead of time, feel free to talk to our project managers about that. I think it's also important to note here that when we get to the final document, which will have narrative, the technical appendices for all of these, that we'll also be using information that is not required but related. So as many of you were involved in our mobility recovery work, we're also been working on a transportation equity framework. Again, while they're not required, they are related and will feed into the information that we use throughout the 2050 update. And again, there's a public engagement component to this that we'll show a little bit on the next slide. So we just wanted to show you that in the milestones, again, we've already begun work on these 9 interweaving projects. This will culminate in a full public comment period next summer with the plan update and approval. So again, I'll circle back just to give a quick primer on each of the other components, but Lindsay is going to dive into the financial plan.
Thanks, Laura. And this is something that we do every 4 years as part of our requirements as an MPO. We're required to create a long-range, fiscally constrained transportation plan. And some of you may remember from past plans that that really means that we need to do a forecast of how much revenue that we're going to have over the planning period. In this case, it's 28 years. And then we need to determine how we're going to allocate that funding towards different categories. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. 2 intro slides, probably didn't need that. And right here on the screen, this is ON2 2050's financial plan for transportation. And you can see those baseline revenues listed here as subtotal core revenues. Those plus the reasonably expected revenues that would come from our transportation funding recommendations, that totals the amount that we forecast that we'll need to actually spend on the system. And when you're looking at this, I do want to note that the revenue increases that were implemented in Rebuild Illinois, such as the motor vehicle registration fee increases, other fee increases, the motor fuel tax increases, those were already included in this fiscal constraint. So in those revenues, either as really baseline revenues or as new revenue recommendations. And so we are not expecting the forecast in the update to increase as a result of those revenue increases. Please. And can see here, this is basically that second part of the table in chart form. And for ON2 2050, the funds were really primarily allocated towards operating and maintaining the system that we have right now today, and also ensuring that we have enough funding to meet the plan's asset condition targets. For the plan update, we also expect to continue to constrain enough funds to operate and maintain our transportation system, also to constrain enough funding to meet those condition targets again. Also, we have on this chart enhancements to the system in light brown and new capacity costs in darker brown, and those will again be a part of our fiscal constraint for this plan update, but we will be reevaluating everything and figuring out what the system needs are and forecasting everything again. So next slide, please. So with On to 2050, really in order to, well, one, maintain the system we have today, meet those condition targets, and then also allocate those funds towards expanding the system and enhancing the system, we did recommend several new revenue sources. And other than the MFT increase, which was implemented, we expect to basically retain reasonably expected revenue recommendations unless we have a suitable replacement or supplement. And right now we are doing additional research on potential new revenues for the plan update and then also for the mobility recovery work. Next slide, please. So we're going to begin the process to update the plan that I just showed you from On to 2050. Next slide, please. We're going to start by updating that baseline revenue forecast and also doing a forecast of how much it's going to take to operate and maintain the transportation network that we have in place today. And then after that, we will work on determining reasonably expected revenue recommendations and forecasts, and then finally actually taking that whole fiscal constraint and allocating funding towards those funding categories you saw in that pie chart earlier in the presentation. Next slide, please. So how are we going to do this? So right now, we are spending a lot of time collecting and analyzing data, and pretty soon, actually, we'll start reaching out to some of you to get feedback on some of our forecasting assumptions and other issues. We're also working closely right now with the RTA and with IDOT on finding ways to model the expenditures necessary to maintain system condition with their models, and we'll eventually be doing the same to figure out how much money we would need to meet the system condition targets that are established. We're also researching potential revenue sources that could help fund transit capital to potentially either add to the revenue recommendations or potentially supplant in one of the revenue recommendations, as the current set of revenue recommendations actually doesn't provide for a dedicated source of transit capital funds that would actually meet the needs of the transit system. And this committee can expect to hear back from us in a few months with some of the initial work that we're doing on the forecast. Next slide, please. Yep, I think that's it. I'll pass it back to Laura, but feel free to contact me if you have any questions. But like I said, we'll be reaching out to many of you in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I'll just kick through some of these other slides and then again, open for discussion or any questions that you have for either Lindsay or myself. Just so again, we're kind of clear on what the other elements are going to be. And again, we will be bringing more information to you on each of these over the course of the next year. We'll be doing the travel model data development, where we're going to be updating those forecasts, and Sarah will be leading that. We're just going to kick through these. And then again, regional socioeconomic forecasts, which I know that all of you will be interested to hear more about. And again, as Lindsay noted, that will be a topic soon to talk to you about, is the regional and local projections for the population, households, and employment. And that is something that we're obviously taking a very close look at. And go ahead. And then the other piece is the system performance report and the federal targets. This is in order for us to update all of our performance measures and document the impact of the TIP on those performance measures. And Martin will be leading that work for us. And then the plan indicators and targets, which again, we look at pretty consistently, and to assess and update all of the indicators that we put together for the last plan. And Noel will be moving that forward for us. The regionally significant projects, again, another component piece of this that is not easy, but important to this group is to revise and reevaluate the capital investments. And obviously the important part, as Lindsay said, that also is that we have to demonstrate the fiscal constraints. The current RSP lists are going to be provided to the implementers in June, and staff will be working with many of you as our implementers to set up meetings in July to look at those lists in order to have the revised project list submitted to us by September so that we have time to do the evaluation to meet our target for the entire plan. And again, we'll be talking more about this with you shortly, but Terry is leading that as well. And then the conformity analysis, as again, we were having discussions earlier today, and make sure is that we demonstrate that the TIP and the plan conform to our emissions budget. So Russell, as you well know in this group, will be leading that work for us. The one other piece that I want to point out is we have the updated TIP that we'll be working on through this process, and Kama is our project manager for that. And the last component piece is really what goes throughout the entire project is public engagement. This type of work, meeting with each of you, our different boards and committees, and then we will have a public hearing in 2022 as required for the plan. And Jane, as she did for the 2050 plan, will be leading that work for us. So again, I just wanted to return to show that the entire project has many different required projects on the next slide that shows that each of these are kind of interweaving and leaning on each other that will, again, culminate in a final plan update next year, and hope to have that completed by, we'll need to have it completed by October of 22. So I'll open it up for questions of us and the projects, how we're approaching them, or Lindsay on the financial plan.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Lindsay. This was a really helpful overview. I know this is an important part of the MPO responsibility, and in any given year, this would be a lot of work. So doing this and doing mobility recovery and the transportation equity work is a lot of work for you. So we really appreciate it, and we will appreciate being kept up to date throughout the year on all of this. Does anyone have questions for Laura or for Lindsay? Questions? No questions?
Hi, this is Amy. I actually do have a question.
Great.
How does the work of the mobility recovery work sort of feed into then this update?
That is a great question. And so I think that, again, when we talk about, I think they'll be informing each other. We're still using the base, even for mobility recovery. It's not that we're changing the 2050 policies or plans. It is really how we need to be prioritizing the implementation of those things. So it's really, what do we have consensus to move forward with? What elements of the 2050 plan, do we need to double down on now because the mobility recovery versus looking at the long term? But, a lot of what Lindsay and I've had conversations is that financial plan are still the things that we're talking about. And if there are different things that come out of that, we will address that. But I think right now it's really less of it's going to change and more informing of how we need to go about practically implementing the 2050 plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, that was a great question. Anybody else have any questions for Laura or Lindsay? No? All right. Well, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and move on to item 7, where we actually talk more about mobility recovery. Stephanie, off to you.
Thanks, Jessica. My name is Stephanie Levine. I'm an analyst on the policy team here at CMAP. I'm also the project manager for our mobility recovery project. That was a great segue, so thank you, Amy. And I'm sharing more about the project with you all today. Next slide. So the origin of this project comes from coordination between the 7 county board chairs who came together at the onset of the pandemic to organize sort of a regional response to the public health crisis. They requested that CMAP lead planning efforts for the transportation network because so many of the region's longstanding challenges to our network have been accelerated by the pandemic. So as a response to this request, CMAP kicked off our mobility recovery work, and we have brought on a team of consultants to assist us in this work. The project is really focused on two primary things. First, mitigating recent shocks to the transportation system, and second, keeping the region on track to meeting the goals of ONTO 2050. So the plan is going to develop a strategic action plan that is specifically focused on sustaining the transit network, how to mitigate a likely rebound in congestion, and also how to generate sustainable revenue sources that can be responsive to changes in travel demand in the future. Next slide, please. So the plan we're going to develop through this project will address our mobility needs in the short to medium term. So as you can see up on this slide, the project is going to undertake discrete tasks that will sort of build up to and then inform the final plan. We're really thinking about these tasks as building blocks that are going to be iterative and also can be responsive to changing conditions over the next 12 to 16 months, just because things are evolving so quickly. You know, the world already looks quite different today than when we kicked off this project back in January. So today I can share some work we've conducted to date on task 1, which is providing the policy context and direction for the project. I'm going to also share some work we've done on task 2, which is developing a tool that's going to help us verify the financial sustainability of any of the proposed solutions. Then as we continue on throughout the summer, we're going to keep working on task 3, which will entail characterizing COVID-related changes that we're seeing to employment, what's happening in real estate markets, as well as travel preferences. So the data that we collect there is ultimately going to help us model different possible travel demand scenarios. So these are different futures we may see coming out of the recovery period. And then based on our modeling results, we're then going to characterize different travel markets and match them with TDM strategies. So along the way, as you can see on the bottom of this chart, we're going to consult our steering committee, which we've put together for this project in order to gather partner feedback. Next slide, please. On our steering committee, we have representation from the region's transportation implementers, our federal partners, all 7 counties, some representation from local government, as well as civic and nonprofit leaders. We've already met twice and have gathered some really valuable feedback that I think has already helped shape the project. And I know that many of the folks here today that sit on TC have been participating in that steering committee. I just want to say we do appreciate everyone's participation. I think we've had some really productive conversations so far in those meetings. So moving on, a bit about the policy direction for the project. Go to the next slide, please. One goal of the project is to facilitate conversations that sort of move beyond a focus on the existing structural and political barriers and instead sort of foster, an anything is possible outlook to get to those outcomes that we really want to achieve for the region. So to do this, our project team has identified 4 policy areas that we expect the recommendations might fall under. These include transportation equity, shared mobility in its broadest sense, demand management, and deploying technology. And then within each of these focus areas, we're looking to regional peers and global cities to understand some of the best use cases and examples and pilots that might help us expand our own thinking here in our region on how to approach some of our own unique challenges. During the steering committee, we polled the group on which case studies they wanted the project team to learn more about for possible implementation in our own region. And then based on that input, we're currently reaching out to the sponsoring agencies that have stars next to them on this slide to learn more about those projects, lessons learned, and see how we may be able to pursue similar pilots and initiatives in our own region. So moving on to the next task, which is understanding the financial sustainability of any of the recommendations we pursue as part of this project. And to do this, we're going to develop what we're calling sort of a sketch planning tool. It's essentially an Excel model, but it's going to help us model different revenue scenarios in the short to medium term. So the tool is going to have both road network and transit inputs together. And this is going to allow a more holistic approach to understanding at the regional level how we may assess new revenue options. We can go to the next slide, please. So one of the key recommendations from the mobility chapter of On to 2050 is to fully fund the region's transportation system. And this is, a simple concept, but very difficult to put into practice. And as we all know, that decades of underinvestment have created a significant backlog of projects to reach a state of good repair here in our region. We also know current revenues do not reflect actual systems costs or ways people travel. And now future travel patterns may be shifting permanently or not. There's still just so much uncertainty that we're trying to understand. But many of the funding strategies from On to 2050 that we've already identified as funding strategies that provide the type of flexibility we need to manage congestion and address other challenges that might arrive after a recovery period can help us sort of move towards that goal. And so On to 2050 specifically recommends furthering implementation of tolling, further implementation of managed lanes, and other pricing policies that address congestion. On to 2050 recommends using toll revenue to pursue multimodal goals. It also recommends, of course, as Lindsay was mentioning, replacing the motor fuel tax with a road usage charge, among other funding recommendations. So the sketch planning tool is going to consider a future typical year. So this is somewhere in the 5 to 10 year time horizon. So we're looking at a period post-recovery, and it's going to use annualized revenue and expense data from a 2019 baseline. And so this is both for capital and operating. And so this is going to help us estimate how much revenue different possible sources could raise either on their own or as a package of new revenue sources. And then we can also flip how we're assessing the new revenue sources and instead define, levels of service or different investments we want to see, and how much revenue would be required and at what rates to support those kinds of scenarios. The tool is also going to allow us to test different policies that are recommended by On to 2050. So these could be changes to existing revenue sources, like an expansion to the sales tax base, which is already included in the On to 2050 financial plan. But it's also can help us look at the implementation of new revenues. So we have gathered some targeted feedback to make sure the tool is going to be useful to our partners. And in the last month, we've met with the 3 service boards to talk through some of the input assumptions and to also just sort of better understand the types of scenarios and different policy levers that our partners might be interested in using this tool to test. We, during our steering committee meeting, we polled the steering committee to see what new funding and revenue sources they see as the most promising. These are our extremely unscientific results from our poll, but show the % of votes cast in a ranking activity for each of the new and expanded revenue sources. More than anything, this is just really intended to get a snapshot of interest in different options from our partners, just to make sure that the model is going to be well calibrated to examine the sources that are of most interest. So you can see here those revenues that were of highest interest were, congestion pricing, transition to a road usage charge, changes to parking taxes, as well as a couple other items. So go on to the next slide. Thanks. And then moving into the summer, I think you can go on to the next slide. We're going to continue to work on our trend analysis of both land use, real estate market, and employment changes to try and determine what trends have been either accelerated or disrupted in some way by the pandemic. We're also going to try to see how durable those changes may be. We're going to continue to disaggregate travel data. We're also going to provide other inputs into our scenario development for our travel modeling, which we're going to conduct this summer. And we don't yet have a date for our next steering committee meeting, but we expect that once we wrap up all of these land use and employment and real estate market changes, this research activity, that then we'll be bringing those results to the steering committee late summer for the next meeting. Yeah, so I'm happy to take any questions, and then my email's up here. If you have anything comes up after the meeting, please feel free to reach out.
I have a question. This is Joe Schofer from Northwestern. I didn't hear the words freight, and I think it's important that freight be given some serious consideration. Chicago is a center for freight at the national scale, at the regional scale, and freight is very important locally for jobs, for the environment, for congestion, for the quality of life. And the changes in retailing in particular have made us Center for Intermodal Transportation and Dispersed Delivery. And I think it's important to consider that going forward.
Thank you. That'll certainly be part of the travel modeling, and I think it's definitely a consideration as we look at employment and land use changes and growth of warehousing and some of those other changes we're really seeing accelerated throughout the last year.
I have a question, and it kind of builds on what you just touched on, because I was, recently read, some of the information that came out from CMAP, just been following very closely about how traffic volumes have been rebounding. So it was very interesting, to hear that overall statewide traffic volumes have now reached pre-pandemic levels. And I think we certainly all feel that when we're out ourselves, right? And then, so there's a component where it says support CMAP travel demand modeling. So I'm just interested in, is there any way you can touch on, some of those things that you'll be focusing on later this summer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the travel demand modeling we're going to be doing this summer will involve an activity that will require us to sort of think broadly about what a post-COVID region might look like. And we're going to use all the available data we have, and travel changes over the last year will certainly be an input into the development of those scenarios. And so we're using those indicators to predict what kind of futures we may be seeing. So for example, the rebound in both single occupancy vehicle travel as well as freight traffic is certainly going to play into how we develop those scenarios. And one of the, the part of the reason we're conducting this project is we are anticipating significant amounts of congestion coming out of a recovery period, and want to make sure that we have thought through what kind of impacts to the network that may bring and how we can support our transit partners and our other implementation partners to address that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because you can see that traffic volumes have come back, but traffic patterns, may have changed, right? So I presume that would be, some of what's being looked at then.
Yes, and yeah, time of day and
right,
just
hours,
this geospatial location, that congestion, the location of the congestion is changing as well. So that'll be part of the modeling.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Do we have any other questions for Stephanie from the committee? Hearing none. All right, thanks, Stephanie. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you over the next few months.
Yeah,
all right.
And I just want to again say thank you to everyone who's participated in the steering committee meetings. We do appreciate that.
All right, let's move on to agenda item 8, which is the Chicago Rail's Future 2 study. For this one, we'll have CDOT staff Elaine McKenzie with us. Up to you, Elaine. Elaine, unfortunately, we can't hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now, Jessica?
Now I can, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, sorry. It's not a web meeting without web issues, right? But thank you for the time to present to the committee today. I'd like to walk you through an update to the Chicago Rail Futures 2 study. I'm Elaine McKenzie with Cambridge Systematics, and we're the prime consultant on this study, working with the Chicago Department of Transportation. Next slide, please. So to give a little bit of background, as has come up on this meeting and pretty much every meeting related to transportation in Chicago, rail and freight as well as passenger is very critical for our region's economy as well as way of life. The first study that we're really looking at and building on is the early freight rail futures study. So this is why this is study number 2. Some of you may remember that this was one of the first efforts to look at the economic and regional importance of rail. And this study was critical to make the case for the creation of the CREATE program. One thing that this study did is model the economic importance of investing in rail in the Chicago region and looking at that versus other types of scenarios, such as moving rail traffic away from Chicago. And overwhelmingly, the case was that it is very critical to invest in the Chicago region. Fast forward about 10 years later, and the CREATE program undertook a review of the benefits of the program, what had been accomplished so far, but critically, what the overall benefits of the program were expected to be. And this is very important for continuing to bring in federal funds, as well as allocating other sources towards these very needed investments. This analysis found that there's about $31 billion of benefits for about $5 billion of costs. So you don't have to be good at math to know that that's a really great, really great number, and really emphasizes the benefits of this program that we continue to invest in. However, there were limitations to these studies, primarily that they focused on economic benefits, many of which are accrued nationally. But we also know that a lot of the impacts of rail are felt locally. And so this study is both to update and build on the existing economic work, as well as take a more critical eye and a more expansive eye on how rail impacts the Chicago region. Next slide, please. So the goals of this study are really to understand what does the future hold for rail in Chicago, and then also how can we best shape this future through investment and policy that leverages these opportunities while minimizing the negative impacts for everybody. And I do want to note that even though this study is with the Chicago Department of Transportation, we are looking at the region as a whole. There are, numerous rail lines and facilities and impacts outside of Chicago, so we are looking at the entire CMAP region. We want to illustrate the relationship between rail and the regional economy, understand the benefits of rail to local residents, businesses, and users. We're looking to quantify the value of investments made, as well as those that are planned and needed in the future. And then ultimately put together the information, under these categories to support the conversation about continued needed rail investment in Chicago, and position the region to make future investments that not only support our economic future, but are thought about in an equitable and effective way. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So, these are updated numbers, but many of you have seen either this graphic or something similar, looking at how critical Chicago's rail network is to the national and regional economy. Almost 50% of intermodal rail cars and about a third of all rail cars in the US touch Chicago. So these are things that are not only going to our local markets, but going to markets across the country and other population centers. One of the biggest markets for rail traffic is consumer products, so things coming in from the ports that are transported across the country to go into our stores and to our consumers. Vehicles, chemicals, coal, aggregates, other types of heavy and big commodities are also critical to have on the rail system because we can move these commodities effectively without putting more trucks on the road. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, much of the conversation about rail has been about these economic impacts. And while those are critically important, we also know that there's significant local impacts to rail. Things like environmental impacts, such as pollution of the air, water, vibration, noise pollution, local economic impacts, such as jobs, property values, safety, that was brought up by Aaron and others as continues to be the top priority. And so, looking at what are the impacts of rail in terms of safety, as well as equity implications, because these impacts are not felt equally throughout the region. One of the best comments that I've received giving a similar presentation lately was a comment about, understanding, okay, a third of all rail cars go through Chicago. That's great. But how does that translate to the trucks that we see on the road? Those containers that come in via rail oftentimes get put on the roadway, either for a hop across Chicago to another rail yard or to be delivered to their destination. And so really, when we're thinking of the impacts of rail, it's beyond just what's on the rail lines and the rail yards, but really tied into the overall economy and transportation section. Next slide, please. So I'll dive in a little bit today on one topic that we're looking at in terms of the study is investigating these equity related issues in the Chicago region. We've undertaken a number of different activities, primarily a survey to better understand how different communities and organizations have understand rail and equity issues. We've also undertaken interviews, many of you on this group and other key stakeholders, as well as started focus groups with specific organizations and stakeholders to dig into some of these issues a little bit more. We're also doing some data analysis to understand really, from a demographic and geographic perspective, who is being primarily affected by these types of concerns. Next slide, please. So we undertook this spring a community equity survey. It was distributed to over 600 people, including community organizations, agencies like CMAP and Metropolitan Planning Council, to elected officials at all levels throughout the region, as well as it was open to community members themselves and others to take. One of the things that I want to point out is that a lot of what we heard from organizations was really, focused on kind of the direct questions of the impacts of rail itself. So things like grade crossings, rail safety, impacts from rail lines. Whereas it was interesting to find a lot of the comments that we got from community members were really focused on these secondary impacts. For example, and primarily how rail translates to number of trucks on the road. Next slide, please. So we received over 250 responses. I'll share a little bit of highlights of our findings from this survey here. I'll also be presenting at the county's committee this afternoon and share a little bit more detail there for those of you who are attending that meeting. We asked about 6 categories of questions, and both had the participants dive into each question area, as well as rank the categories. In the 250 responses that we received, not surprisingly, safety was ranked as the first most important issue, followed by health and the environment, traffic and vehicle movement. And then, but I do want to say, on all of these, even the ones that were ranked, as less priority, there were, key concerns that came up. And so we were able to learn, what was important to people. And a lot of this also related to geographic area. So throughout the region, we found that different areas have different types of concerns related to rail and equity. And so that was something important and interesting that we learned as well. Next slide. So safety, as I mentioned, was ranked as the highest priority category. This was really reflected in what we heard from respondents. On the left, you see how residents, so community members who were answering on behalf of themselves, ranked the different types of potential safety issues. On the right, you see how organizations such as CMAP or other agencies or community groups or elected officials ranked different types of issues. And as I mentioned, one of the things that we found is that really across all of the categories, community priorities were really focused on trucks and those kind of secondary impacts of rail that you see going down the street. And not all trucks are related to rail traffic, but there certainly is a relationship, both that the increase in different types of economic activity bring more trucks to the area, as well as having a robust rail system keeps trucks off the road. So it's kind of a complicated and interesting relationship. One of the things that I'll mention is that so grade crossings were rated as overall, something that was important, but was more important from the organizational perspective in terms of how they ranked it than from the community perspective. Again, trucks kind of dominated the responses in terms of community members. Next slide. Again, similarly, we asked about health and the environment, and you can see right here, again, it's ranked by how residents or community members responded, and then on the right, you can see how organizations responded. And again, issues related to large trucks dominate. What we see is that vehicles, both trucks and trains, were also seen as more disruptive than freight facilities themselves. I do want to just quickly mention, we understand this is not a statistically significant survey. We're really at the information gathering stage. So, we'll want to use these, and we can go to the next slide. We'll want to use these to better refine the next steps in the study and how we continue to think about rail and inequity related issues in the region. So this isn't an endpoint, this is a beginning point for us. So in terms of next steps, we're going to continue to study the rail inequity issues. We'll be putting together technical information in a white paper looking at the state of the system in general and how that's changed over the last 20 years. In addition, continuing our research to community members and those on the equity front, we will be starting an outreach campaign to rail users and other businesses in the region. And then finally, all throughout, we've been working with our railroad and agency partners to understand rail's performance, the challenges, both what we've seen in the last year as well as over a longer period of time, and really try to understand and kind of shape what's next for Chicago. Next slide, please. Just quickly in terms of time frame, so as you can see here on the top, we'll continue to have stakeholder engagement efforts throughout the study over the next year or so, as well as digging into more of these technical aspects, including these research papers, and then transitioning into some economic analysis. And then ultimately looking for a final report and recommendations in 2022. Next slide, please. And I believe this is the end of my presentation, but just have the study contacts here, myself at Cambridge Systematics, as well as Jeff Shriver at Chicago Department of Transportation. Thanks again for the opportunity to present. I'd be glad to take any questions or comments.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks for that overview. I liked what you said very early on in the presentation about the fact that when people are thinking about freight, when we're thinking about freight, it's not just rail freight, but it's rail freight and the truck freight and everything that comes out of that. And there's a lot of interconnections between all these modes. So it's definitely fitting for us to talk about that today as we're thinking about both the onto 2050 update and also the recovery work. So thanks for sharing all of that. Does anybody have any questions for Elaine?
Jessica, this is Sriraj.
Sure, Sriraj, go ahead.
Just a question and a comment, Elaine. Thank you for the presentation. This is looks like it's going to be very impactful. Looking forward to the final report. As I was looking through the slide deck, I noticed that grade crossings, you mentioned it. I know all of us know that this region has the largest number of at-grade crossings for any region in the country. And we also have significant issues pertaining to equity and grade crossings as the region is laid out geographically. So one of the questions that I have for you, and you may have taken this into consideration, is are you looking at any of the disbenefits from the grade crossings to motorists? Because there are delays that accrue very in an unbalanced manner. Overall, it may just even out, but certain communities, certain areas in the region are very disproportionately affected. And I know CREATE is trying to address it, but the resources are just not there. So that's one question I have. The other is, of course, the most important issue of pedestrian and bike safety at grade crossings. I don't know how much of that got a lot of play in your report and your analysis. I know the people reflected it very favorably, and then that's one of the stronger issues when I looked at the table. And the agencies also are acknowledging, but having worked on that area, that there is just not enough dedicated funding to improve safety for pedestrians and bicyclists. So these are just comments that I have. I don't know how you will incorporate them in your work. One other source that you may have seen already, APTA has is coming out with a framework for return on investment for rail projects. They're focusing on high-speed rail. They're coming out with the second phase. The first one was done by us back in 2016 at UIC. The second one is being done by the Economic Development Group in Boston, and they should be coming out with the final report anytime now. I would, if you have not looked at it, I would strongly recommend that you consult with that, because there are a whole lot of qualitative issues that are going into that report as factors that will impact the return on investment for rail projects. So those are my comments. If you have any thoughts on that, you can share them now, or we can have an offline conversation as well.
Yes, thank you, Suresh, for those comments and that those resources. So yes, you know, as you saw, grade crossings are definitely an issue, and we saw that, you know, the interesting thing, I think, to me is not, you know, from what we found of this unscientific survey is, you know, not saying that they're not important, but I think the visibility in terms of the issues surrounding grade crossings is very dependent on perhaps whether you're affected by them or the area of the city that you live in. And so these are areas that we do want to dig into a little bit deeper and understand, you know, because these disbenefits are certainly not being accrued equally across the region. We've also been working with Tom Murtha at CMAP, who, as you know, has been looking, you know, very closely into this issue, as well as others, to, you know, make sure that we are doing our best to understand, you know, what type of issues are happening, and, you know, as much as we can kind of improve the research in terms of motorist delay, as well as issues to pedestrians and bikes. So yes, no, like I said, we're at the beginning of this, and kind of part of the outreach effort that I talked about today was to understand kind of what and where are the most important concerns, and so this is definitely an area that we want to look into further as part of this study. So thank you for that.
Sure. I know it's always a struggle to balance out the regional versus the local micro level impacts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you will look into that or address that in the report, but that's something that needs to be thought through. As far as Tom Murtha, I know Tom has been working on delays to motorists for some time now. We at UIC have also developed a model that will predict motorist delay at grade crossings based off of a small sample that we had from Dalton and Riverdale, essentially communities that are the worst affected in my understanding for the region. So those are also resources that I would be happy to share with you at the appropriate time if needed.
Great, yes, I'd love to have a follow-up conversation with you.
Sure.
Thanks, Sriraj. Thanks, Elaine, for that. And thanks for being here with us today. Let's go ahead and move on to agenda item 9, which is the ADA Paratransit Service Delivery Innovation Study. For this one, we have Peter Kirsten from my team at RTA, actually, who'll be presenting. We also have Sally Williams from PACE on the line as well. So go ahead, Peter.
Hello, and thank you for having me today to tell you about the ADA Paratransit Innovation Study. Again, my name is Peter Kirsten. I'm a strategic planner at the RTA and project manager for the study. And then as well, Sally is on. I'll be doing the presentation, but we'll have her on the line for questions at the end. Go ahead to the next slide. So today we'll talk about some of the basic elements of ADA Paratransit, both how it works and why it works the way it does in our region, how trends are shifting over time, and then talk through the project overview and some of the analysis that informed what potential innovations kind of rose to the top and may be implemented in the next steps. Lastly, we will have some time for questions at the end. Go ahead to the next slide. So a fair amount of background here. The Americans with Disability Act, or the ADA, does require that public transit agencies provide complimentary paratransit service to people with disabilities who cannot use fixed route, bus, or rail service because of a disability. The ADA regulations specifically define a population of customers who are entitled to this service as a civil right. The regulations also define minimum service characteristics that must be met for this service to be considered equivalent to the fixed route service it is intended to complement. Additionally, all CTA and PACE buses are fully accessible in our region. All CTA trains and individual train cars are accessible. All Metro trains have at least one accessible car, but there are still many CTA and Metro rail stations that are not accessible. And oftentimes, the sidewalk network is insufficient to provide an accessible path of travel for access and egress to transit, which can be made worse by weather and other conditions in the region. You may have heard funding for ADA paratransit as coming off the top. What this means is that service is fully funded first before allocations to the service boards are made. So the RTA collects the sales tax that funds much of the operating revenue for CTA, Metro, and PACE, but before that money gets put towards bus and train operations, ADA paratransit is funded first. And then lastly, ADA riders are determined eligible for the service through an evaluation process, and that is performed by RTA Mobility Services. Next slide. So a couple more refreshers before we get into the study. ADA paratransit covers the full 6-county region. The complimentary service is offered in a 3/4 mile buffer around all bus and heavy rail service within our region, and that's the map that you're seeing on the left here. Just a buffer around all bus and CTA rail. ADA paratransit service is required for the entirety of the CTA bus and rail and PACE bus service areas. All ADA paratransit service is operated by PACE though, including that in the city of Chicago or the CTA service area. Commuter rail does have to adhere to the Americans with Disability Act, but does not have the same requirements for offering complimentary service. So again, Metro has an accessible car in every train. Additionally, most stations are fully accessible, but they're not included in the map on the left here. So again, the map shows the buffer. All ADA paratransit trips are booked 24 hours in advance, and they must begin and end within the buffer that you see on the map. In 2019, PACE ADA paratransit served roughly 4 million passenger trips over 36 million passenger miles. The fare to ride a trip is $3.25. PACE ADA paratransit is one of the largest operations in the country, and by many measures, PACE performs at or above peer averages, as published in the RTA sub-regional report. Next slide. So the figure on the right shows ADA paratransit trips by service type. So Chicago, suburban service, and then the Taxi Access Program, or TAP, as you'll hear it referred to. So you can quickly see that service within the city of Chicago represents the lion's share of all trips on the system. Over the past decade plus, there has been consistent concern about a huge growth in total trips. This is even one of the main reasons that this study was undertaken. While there certainly is evidence that our regional population is getting older and perhaps more reliant on paratransit type services, this really hasn't played out in trip generation on the ADA system. The big jump in trips that you see from 2010 to 11 is actually just related to a change in how trip counts are made, more specifically counting companions as a separate passenger trip. Many ADA passengers ride with a companion. Since 2011, trips have stayed relatively steady with modest growth in the suburbs and TAP, and then obviously all trips steeply dropping off due to the pandemic. Additionally, since ADA paratransit riders are determined eligible for the service, it's pretty easy to map where people live that use ADA paratransit. So the map on the left is aggregating registrants by census tract. You can quickly see that there is at least one registrant in almost every single census tract throughout the 6 counties. But obviously the concentrations of riders are within the city of Chicago, mostly on the south and west sides, and then some pockets into suburban Cook County. 2 additional notes here. The Taxi Access Program, or TAP, it's a user-size subsidy that is offered for trips beginning in the city of Chicago. And it basically provides ADA riders, so approved ADA riders, with a voucher for them to purchase a taxi ride in lieu of using traditional paratransit trip. This offers a savings to PACE as it produces a lower cost per trip. It also allows customers to book trips in real time and on the same day that they want to travel. The challenge in expanding taxis, or TAP rather, is that taxis really only serve certain areas of the city. So downtown, the airports, areas of the north side are where you can find taxis. Secondly, it's worth noting here that in addition to ADA paratransit, so the complementary service, PACE also operates a variety of other paratransit services throughout the region. These are often referred to as dial-a-ride or PACE on demand or call and ride. While many of the things we learned through this study may be applicable to paratransit more broadly, the study and everything I'm sharing today is really exclusively focused on the ADA paratransit service. Next slide. So last piece of background, and then we will jump into the study. So while growth in trips has not expanded as steeply as what may have been projected in years past, the cost to serve trips has seen an increase in the past 10 years. So from 2009 to 19, annual operating expenses grew roughly 27% in inflation-adjusted dollars. Additionally, in thinking about operating costs, it's worth noting here that PACE contracts all of the ADA service out to a number of different providers. These increasing costs were, again, one of the reasons this study was undertaken. Next slide. So with that background, I'll jump now into the project overview. So the purpose of this project was to identify innovations that can be piloted in the real world and in relatively short term. At the outset, pilot concepts covered a range of operational elements, including improved system sustainability, cost containment, and improving PACE's ability to adapt to shifts in demand, technology, and rider needs. Since then, the project team has kind of homed in on specific innovations to pilot, which we'll cover in a moment. The project team was led by consultants from IBI Group, Demand Trans, and Fish Transportation Group. The effort also had two committees guiding the work, which included executives and staff from PACE and RTA, along with board chairs for several citizen advisory groups. Next slide. So the project team agreed to a set of guiding principles, or principles that are guiding the work, based on preserving the integrity of the existing system and remaining compliant, obviously, with all regulatory requirements. Next slide. And the project also leveraged goals from Invest in Transit, the RTA strategic plan. And then as well, efforts have been made to ensure that this project is in alignment with other strategic activities, even as priorities may have shifted over the course of the project timeline and in response to the impact of the pandemic. Next slide. So this is the complete scope of work. This included identifying challenges, literature review, understanding what others are doing, an initial identification of potential innovations, which was then whittled down through modeling and analysis, and evaluation criteria, a peer workshop where we had an opportunity to talk with others who have piloted some of these concepts, and then lastly, an action plan for recommended innovations. And again, this document serves as kind of the final report of the study itself. And I'll stop here just to mention that I'm really just giving a very high-level summary of all the work that was completed, but all of the technical memoranda for the study are available on the RTANS library. If people have more specific questions about the analysis, I'd be happy to have a conversation offline as well. Next slide. So first getting into kind of the analysis here, the work the project team did. First up is the challenges to sustainability, which again, I'm just summarizing here. But so ridership, as mentioned in some of the background, the city of Chicago accounts for 72% of all system trips. Only 6% occur outside of Cook County. So while the ADA network serves all 6 counties, the bulk of trips are happening within Cook and the city of Chicago. And as we get into the modeling and analysis, as well as the recommendations, you'll see that this is really where the focus is. And the idea here is that, to really move the needle on cost or productivity within the ADA paratransit system, you have to be focused on where the greatest demand is, and that is certainly within Cook County. Changing demographics, so kind of as discussed, population is aging. It's also kind of shifting from Cook to the collar counties. Population is growing where there's less transit service and to areas that are harder to serve with transit. This is true both for the fixed route system as well as the complementary service. eligibility and certification, there have been increases in who's getting certified to use the service as the population has continued to age. At this point, again, this has not translated into a big spike in demand for trips, but that could change in the future. Financials and funding, so cost per trip has increased. TAP remains the most cost-effective way to serve these trips. While costs are not out of control, money spent on the ADA system is somewhat of a limiting factor for other modes. Again, we fund ADA first before we put money towards bus and rail. Service delivery. Challenges reflect the complexity of other factors, such as the demographic shifts we've already talked about, emerging technology, labor, and things like road congestion. I mean, these are buses that operate in traffic. Changing mobility and emerging technology, building on the non-dedicated vehicle success, such as TAP, is somewhat limited by the uncertainties of the industry. So the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, the taxi companies, these services have grown and changed a lot in recent years, but it's unclear how sustainable these businesses are in the long term, and certainly how sustainable they are as partners for an ADA service. And then lastly, flexibility in the current platform. So the size and scope of PACE ADA paratransit really cannot be overlooked. It's a very large operation, again, one of the largest in the country. Additionally, commitment to Trapeze as PACE's technology partner has served them well, but is an additional operational component to consider in thinking about how to innovate. Next slide. So after working through the challenges to sustainability, the project team focused on identifying potential innovations. These are kind of the menu of options that were whittled down by the project team as to advance or not, and presented to the advisory committee for their screening and feedback. The options visualized here as a text cloud are extensive, ranging from new and emerging technologies such as mobility on demand, autonomous vehicles, vehicle electrification, to more conventional things like looking at application of conditional eligibility, pricing policies, and communications as ways to reduce cost through innovation. Next slide. So with input from the advisory committee, this is ultimately the list that was advanced for modeling and analysis. And the primary component of this analysis was modeling shifts in productivity using anonymous trip data that was provided by PACE. So roughly 3 months of system-wide origins and destinations, looking at the whole system and then measuring each innovation's potential impact on system cost and productivity. In a second step, the project team then weighed each innovation against evaluation criteria. So not just cost and productivity, but looking at how each innovation helps us work towards regional goals and the study principles. This really is the bulk of the project, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I'll just reiterate that all of the documentation is available via RTAMS for anyone wanting to learn more about the work that was done. Next step, or slide, thank you. So then as well, there was a peer review workshop that took place virtually, included agencies from all over the country piloting and implementing innovations within ADA paratransit operations. This included MBTA, New Jersey Transit, RTC Las Vegas, Metro Houston, MTA Nashville, Access Services in Los Angeles, and WMATA in DC. Much of the conversation focused on TNCs or transportation network companies, such as Uber and Lyft, and then taxis. So again, all non-dedicated vehicles. So using vehicles both in terms of consumer choice models like TAP, so where the customer is able to transact directly and book directly with a third party, as well as back-end applications. So utilizing taxis and TNCs as an operational tool to improve productivity. MBTA and RTC Las Vegas are two pioneers in this field, although I believe every agency that participated is currently using some sort of non-dedicated vehicles already, and that obviously includes PACE. Discussion included program structure, subsidy parameters, and contracting, reliability of partners. So again, will TNCs, will Uber and Lyft always be this cost effective? How do you account for wheelchair accessible vehicles when it's primarily private vehicles that are used by Uber and Lyft? Additionally, how do you account for induced demand? So when you offer a competitive, convenient service, you may get more riders, you may get more demand for travel. Notably, most agencies have rolled out consumer choice pilots to a subset of riders, both accounting for some of the technology challenges that riders may encounter in using an app-based service like a TNC, but also as a means to set an upper bound on induced demand. So before kind of opening it up to everyone, you use kind of a pilot group to see how much more travel is demanded with this option. MBTA in Boston has taken the opposite approach and is by far the biggest consumer choice TNC style service nationally. And even with the opposite approach and the induced demand that has come with it, they've still been able to realize goals of improving cost and productivity on the system as a whole. And then lastly, Houston Metro has a unique ADA as a feeder service where a customer can book an on-demand, real-time, so not 24 hours in advance, but in real time, free ADA trip to an accessible transit stop, accessible fixed route transit stop. There are a number of operational and customer concerns to consider in implementing a service like this, which is very enlightening to hear Houston talk through. But the concept is certainly kind of represents more of the long-term goals of more truly integrating a single service that is dynamic and works for all customers with all abilities. Next slide. So that brings me to kind of the last step in the process here, which is the innovations to pilot. So again, this is informed by analysis, peer review, committee input. The project team developed 3 innovations, or the consultant recommendations to pilot. The final deliverable, again, is the action plan, which really shows how the analysis informed these innovations and provides a high-level process for implementation for each of the 3. Next slide. So first up is same-day service to PACE paratransit customers. A pilot, which would contract with 2 or more non-dedicated service providers. So these would be likely TNCs like Lyft and Uber, as well as potentially opening it up to additional taxis. But customers would be able to book trips directly with the service provider and right from their smartphone instantly, or also be able to call in using the reservation service. Simply put, this would be expanding TAP by adding partners and across a broader geography. Again, TAP's main limiting factor is just that there are not that many taxis throughout the region, except for in some pockets within the city. So it's clear that a very substantial shift of trips to TAP is necessary for the ADA program to experience a major cost savings. For context, under current conditions, if about 30% of current ADA trips in the city shifted onto TAP, and there was no increase in overall usage, or there wasn't a big spike in demand, annual savings would be about $18 million. If those trips, that same 30% shifted, but people increased their usage by 25%, so a significant increase in demand, these savings would still be around 13.5 million annually, or approximately 9% of the total cost of the ADA service. So obviously, a projection of savings is not actual savings, but these figures should give you some kind of concepts of the potential offered by shifting more trips onto non-dedicated providers such as taxis and TNCs, which is this, I should reiterate here, is certainly embraced by PACE's current efforts to expand TAP as is. Additionally, the enhanced customer experience would really kind of revolutionize how ADA riders would be able to travel throughout the region. Booking in real time, transacting directly with the third-party provider would allow for freedom of movement, more spontaneity in how people travel throughout the region. Next slide. So then the second one is enhanced use of non-dedicated vehicles. So again, this is expanding the service offering available to PACE in their scheduling of advanced booked paratransit trips. So the previous innovation used the consumer choice model. So you give people some voucher or subsidy for them to go and transact directly. This would instead be kind of on the back end, diverting unproductive trips onto TNCs and taxis. This would be building on Pace's current success, which they do in select areas with certain taxi companies, and then potentially to expand it to Uber and Lyft to really, again, broaden the supply of service that they could use this for. The project team's analysis identifies that the increased use of non-dedicated service providers and a reduction in service by the dedicated vehicle operations. So again, you shift more trips onto the non-dedicated vehicles, which also improves the productivity of your dedicated vehicles. This is the most financially impactful option of the three innovations that we're talking through today. Again, some projected annualized cost reduction for City of Chicago trips, a 15% diversion. So if you took 15% of current trips on dedicated vehicles, shifted them over to non-dedicated vehicles, the cost savings would be about 10.6 million annually. That figure obviously expands with a larger diversion rate. Next slide. So, and then lastly, ADA as a feeder to fixed route. So again, based on the analysis conducted, it is recommended that the feeder service pilot be initiated after the implementation of the same-day consumer choice pilot. The project team's analysis indicates that establishing a feeder service component specifically for the current ADA program, so the current program being next day service on dedicated vehicle operations, is not likely to yield outcomes significantly more cost effective than the current program. So to rephrase that, running an existing agency bus as a feeder service, just taking people to the origin of an accessible transit trip, really is not more cost effective than just taking them all the way to their destination for a variety of reasons. But it's hard to see a big savings in productivity or cost to alter the service in that way. So instead, the thought here for a pilot would be to base the feeder service on the same day consumer choice model. So trips would be delivered on a TNC or a taxi, a non-dedicated vehicle instead of an agency vehicle. And then the pilot concept would be to introduce this option as an added element and use pricing policy to incentivize trips to ADA accessible stations. So if the consumer choice pilot offers you to take you from origin to destination for a certain fare, instead the ADA as a feeder one would say we'll give you a free trip, but it's only going to go to CTA rail station, for example, and then the rider would complete their trip on transit. And next slide. So at this point, the study has concluded, and RTA's direct efforts will just kind of be in presentations like this with stakeholders, riders, and the general public. Pilot implementation will be led by PACE, obviously with support from the RTA. Some of the operational and planning work outlined in the action plan has already begun or been completed. Again, the action plan represents the consultant recommendations and serves as an innovation strategy to guide action. PACE will now work towards implementing these recommendations within the context of their other strategic and operational efforts, and obviously the realities of COVID recovery and the challenges faced within the region. Next slide. So thank you again for having me to speak about the study and share the findings. With that, I will open it up to any questions. And again, Sally Williams from PACE is available here too.
Thanks so much, Peter. I'm looking at the time and seeing we're at about 11:30, so I know we have a couple more agenda items to get through, but does anybody have any kind of burning questions for Peter or for Sally?
Jessica, this is Sriraj. I don't want to take up the time of the committee, but Peter, we can follow up with you to query more about this study. It's very intriguing, but would like to know more about how this was done, and also have a lot of questions about the approach.
I would welcome that opportunity.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Firaj. And yeah, that offer stands for anybody who'd like to learn more. We'd be happy to get together with you and share more anytime. So, all right, thanks, Peter. Let's move on to agenda item 10, which is the legislative update. For this, we have Tim.
Yes, hello. I think just seeing how much time we have left, me and Anthony we're on hand if you have any questions, but nothing to report.
All right. Short item. Any questions for Tim or Anthony? No. All right. Well, let's move on to item 11. Other business. Do we have any other business from the committee today? All right, no other business. Let's move on to public comments. So just a reminder, if you would like to make a public comment, we ask that you put something in the chat so that we know that. Doug and Lindsay, do we have anybody asking to make a public comment at this time?
Yes, Mayor Einhorn would like to address the committee, so I'm going to unmute him now. Oh, I think, Mayor, you should be able to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I have a couple different comments. These will be coming in, I guess, reverse order. In regards to the comments that Elaine McKenzie made regarding the CREATE program, what I'm kind of wondering about is, well, let me digress. You know, CREATE started in about 1999. So it's been out there for a long time, and I follow it on a pretty regular basis. And the problem that was initially identified was all the problems within the city of Chicago. And when you think about all the CREATE programs, pretty much of them are Chicago-centric. However, I'm wondering if anybody has studied the effects of PSR on the CREATE program's initial analysis of what needed to be done. Because now those PSR problems have bled out into the surrounding communities that ring Chicago in a more significant fashion, that being train lengths of 10 to 13,000 feet, and there's no place to hide a train like that. And if that train cannot go from point A to point B, point A meaning someplace out in the collar area, and point B someplace in the center, what are we doing to address that? Because it's not going to get any better unless railroads change their mentality and their working processes, which is highly unlikely because these type of things are just very peripheral to their concern about, you know, getting their trains to the correct destination. And I'm just wondering if CREATE, if Elaine has been tight with the CREATE folks and whether they're even talking about that. That's my first question. And I don't think Elaine is on here anymore. So maybe somebody can relay that to her. I do have her contact information that I got just a couple minutes ago from Barb Sloan, who used to be the person for Cambridge in Chicago. And then the second thing I got is I didn't realize there was issues in regards to the Harvey Dixmoor project. And I would hope that who's ever bringing up these issues, Audrey, I think her name was, I would encourage her to reach out to Leslie Themister from South Suburban Mayors and Managers so that we would be made aware of these kind of problems or at least potential problems, because we don't want to be dedicating money to projects that have already got high enough hurdles to jump over, besides somebody not wanting to do what is being proposed. So we need to talk about that, and I hope somebody can take care of that. And then the last thing, probably if I was to go back and count specific roads, not pronouns and things of that nature, and small words, the most often used word in this entire presentation today has been the word safety. And I guess I'm wondering if there is in the transportation committee's vocabulary, is there a definition of the word safety? And the reason I ask that is because if somebody can explain to me how we are collecting safety data and what safety actually is being defined as, I'm thinking that maybe I'll have a clearer understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, because we see, and you folks see it every day, people making bad decisions that are not related to the construction of any road or any kind of infrastructure, and they do stupid things by traveling at excessive speeds, disobeying traffic lights and traffic laws, and then they crash, and then it becomes a statistic that we use to try to justify an improvement. And I'd like to have somebody either now or maybe by a phone call or something, somebody please explain to me how this stuff interacts, because I just am not getting it. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Mayor. I can see that both Audrey and Elaine are both on the line, and Elaine has put in a message in the chat saying that she's hearing your comments and thanks you for them. And that addresses those first two. We do have a structured way for looking at safety, so that's something we'll take note of and have CMAP staff follow up with you on that question as well. But thank you for your comment.
Okay, thank you.
Doug, do we have other comments or commenters, I should say?
I'm trying to, excuse me, Mayor Current, I don't know if she's able to speak. Kiama, did you?
Mayor Kurtz, are you able to speak? I've got you unmuted on our end, but I know that you were having some audio issues on your end. It doesn't seem like it, so this is Kiama, and I'm happy to relay the mayor's comments that she put into the question box earlier. Mayor Kurtz is the mayor of the Village of Diamond, as well as the chairman of the Will County Governmental League Transportation Committee. So her comment was that on behalf of the Will County Governmental League, she requests that the COVID relief funds that we discussed way earlier on the agenda be distributed through the regular STP program formula, and noted that the Governmental League's STP local methodology guidebook does follow both the CMAP and IDOT policies for identifying priorities. So that was her comment.
Thank you, Kiama, and thank you, Mayor, for that comment. Do we have other comments, Doug?
We received a couple of written comments. We will include them in the minutes. They were very similar to the mayor's comments just now, supporting the current STP structure for the formula. So we'll include those. I don't think it's adding anything new. So we'll hold off on reading those, but they'll be in the minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, with no further public comment, we'll go ahead and move on to item 13. Our next meeting will be on July 16th of 2021. And item 14, do we have any other items before we adjourn, Doug?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right, with that, I will call for adjournment of the committee. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Yes, thanks, everyone.